The winter in the south, though late in arriving, had finally come. Deep into the night, the biting wind howled. While its effect might not be as noticeable in the city, in the suburbs, fallen leaves swirled, creating a very lonely scene. This was a very private suburban area, yet it had several large grand houses. The iron gates of each house were tightly shut, except for one. The two-story Spanish-style house, with ivy covering its walls, had its door partly open. A motorcycle was parked outside. Just then, a dim, yellowish light flickered from the long windows of the living room. The yellowish light came from a flashlight. The hall was quite dim, making it impossible to see who was holding the flashlight. All that could be seen was a tall, dark shape standing close to the wall. The flashlight beam was not very strong, but as it moved around the hall, it showed that the furniture inside the house was extremely luxurious. Suddenly, the flashlight beam stopped on the emerald green carpet in the middle of the hall. On the carpet, a person lay curled up. It was a dead body. The dead person was truly a terrible sight. So, when the circle of yellowish flashlight beam lit up the dead man's face, the light shook a little. This showed that the person holding the flashlight was shocked. It was no longer a human face, but just a bloody, broken mass of flesh and blood. With a snap, the flashlight went out, making the large living room dark again. The person stepped back, moving to a corner of the living room. His mind was racing. All he knew now was that someone was dead, killed by a new type of bullet. This bullet would cause a small explosion when it hit, which explained why the victim's face was a bloody mess. He knew that such bullets were rarely seen. They were mainly used by the spy agencies of a few big countries for killing people. He had only heard stories about them. Yet now, the dead man lying in the hall had indeed been killed by such a bullet. Besides this fact, he felt lost about everything else. He didn't even know why he was there. The large living room was completely dark and silent, with only that one person standing there, not moving. About 5 minutes later, the loud sound of police sirens suddenly broke the quiet of the cold night, coming closer to the house. The person standing in the darkness suddenly moved, then turned and rushed towards the stairs. His movements were quick and light, like a black panther. In a flash, he was upstairs. Just as he reached the upper floor, loud thumps and knocks came from the main entrance. The man stopped on the stairs for a moment, as if thinking whether he should open the door, but in the end, he did not open the door. Instead, he rushed into a bedroom, opened the window, looked outside, and with a quick movement, jumped out of the window. His body curled into a ball in the air. The window was about 15 feet from the ground. However, as soon as his feet touched the ground, his body shot straight up. He jumped another 2 feet high, and with a turn, he ran towards the street corner. Disappearing from sight in an instant, he hurried along the sidewalk for about 10 yards, then stopped under a street lamp and lit a cigarette. In the glow of the street lamp, he could be seen as a thin, very handsome man. With a typical gentlemanly manner, he wore a thick gray wool suit, whose excellent quality and tailoring made him look even more distinguished. The way he snapped open his golden Dunhill lighter was much like a charming movie star from a rich family. Such a person and the act of jumping from a window seemed completely out of place. He lit his cigarette, took a deep breath, and watched as 2 police cars with sirens sped past. Then, he quickly crossed the street. Just then, a taxi slowly drove by. He raised his hand. Taxi. The taxi stopped next to him. He opened the door, got in, and looked back. Sir, the taxi driver's voice was very low. Where to? Fengming Road. The taxi drove forward, turned a corner, and the driver's too low voice began to mumble again. Sir, the wind's really strong tonight. The man started to pay attention to the taxi driver, responding with a low M. It's cold. The taxi driver turned the steering wheel, making the car take a sharp corner. Business gets tough, doesn't it? Chatty drivers weren't unusual, but this one seemed a bit too talkative. He sat up straighter, now more careful. But just then, the driver suddenly turned his head. He had been wearing a cap, pulled down very low. As he turned, he reached up, pushed the cap up, showing his whole face, and let out a scary laugh, saying, Gao Shang, I bet you never expected me to become a taxi driver, did you? A look of surprise immediately appeared on the thin man's face, but he didn't make any sound of alarm. With a slight lean forward, his arm, like a snake, wrapped around the taxi driver's neck. The taxi driver made a choking sound, his hands leaving the steering wheel to pull off the man's arm. The car, out of control, rushed forward like a wild horse. Just then, a thwack suddenly sounded on the rear window of the car. The man was a step too slow to turn his head. A gust of cold wind swept into the car, and a cold gun barrel was pressed against the back of his head. At the same time, a chilling voice from behind his head let out a cold hey, and said, Mr. Gao, Sir Gao, you didn't expect us all to be here, did you? The voice was full of teasing, and then immediately turned into a sharp command. Let go. The person called Gao Shang relaxed his arm, The driver quickly gripped the steering wheel, turning it sharply. The tires screeched on the road with a very harsh sound, and the car swerved just 3 feet from a traffic pole, avoiding a crash. "Put your hands on your head," the voice behind him ordered. Gao Shang put his hands together and placed them on top of his head. In that position, a large ruby ring on his right ring finger shone very brightly. The driver sped the car along. The streets of the cold night were completely silent, allowing him to drive very fast. Meanwhile, the person holding the pistol to the back of Gao Zhang's head was crouching in the car's trunk. It turned out that the car's trunk lid had already been removed and covered with a tarp. When the taxi pulled up next to Gao Shang, even someone as smart as him wouldn't think to check a taxi's trunk. Also, a hole had already been cut in the car's rear window, just big enough for a hand to reach through. A hand, of course, holding a gun. When all this first happened, Gao Shang couldn't help but feel completely confused, because there was no way a second person could fit behind him in the car, so how could someone be there, pressing a gun to him? But as the car continued to move forward, he saw the situation behind him reflected in the side windows. He had been careless for a moment and had fallen into their trap, yet at this moment, there was no sign of panic on his face. Instead, he looked very calm. This was exactly his special quality, the reason he could keep going in a life full of adventures and legends.